Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following program explores the anthropological and sociological shifts within American marital structures and is intended strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. This content does not constitute legal, psychological, or relationship advice. Marriage and divorce are complex matters with significant legal and personal implications that vary by jurisdiction. Viewers should conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals regarding their specific circumstances. In the 1950s, the average American marriage was viewed as a permanent social contract, a foundational bedrock of the economy, and a non-negotiable requirement for social entry. Today, we live in an era where nearly half of all first marriages end in dissolution, and the average length of a marriage before divorce is a mere 8 years. We are witnessing the rise of what sociologists call the divorce now mentality, a radical shift in the American psyche where the exit ramp is no longer a hidden emergency door, but a prominent, well-lit architectural feature of the relationship itself. Why did we move from "until death do us part" to "until my personal growth is stifled"? Why has the stigma that once acted as a social straitjacket completely evaporated in less than 2 generations? If you look at the data, we aren't just getting divorced more. We are conceptualizing the very idea of commitment differently than every single generation of humans that came before us. By the end of this deep dive series, you will understand the hidden economic, biological, and technological levers that have rewired your brain to view long-term partnership as a disposable commodity. To understand the divorce now mentality, we have to perform an autopsy on the stay forever era. For centuries, marriage was an alliance of survival. In the agrarian and early industrial United States, a spouse was a business partner. You didn't marry for soulmate status. You married because the division of labor was a biological and economic necessity. The man provided the external protection and capital. The woman managed the internal production and social capital. If you divorced in 1920, you didn't just lose a partner. You lost your health insurance, your retirement plan, your childcare, and your standing in the local community. The mentality of that era wasn't necessarily more virtuous. It was more constrained. However, as we transitioned into the post-industrial age, the American identity shifted from communalism to expressive individualism. This is the core anthropological driver of the modern divorce rate. Expressive individualism suggests that the highest human good is to find and express one's true self. In this framework, a marriage is only good insofar as it facilitates the personal growth of the individuals within it. When the marriage stops serving the individual's journey of self-discovery, the modern American feels not just a right, but a moral obligation to leave. We have moved the goalposts from stability to self-actualization. Consider the historical trend of the no-fault divorce laws of the 1970s. Before this legislative shift, if you wanted to leave a marriage, you had to prove a fault: adultery, cruelty, or abandonment. You had to provide evidence of a crime against the contract. When California signed the first no-fault bill into law, it fundamentally signaled to the American public that unhappiness or irreconcilable differences were valid grounds for termination. This wasn't just a legal change, it was a psychological permission slip. It allowed for the divorce now mentality to take root, because it removed the requirement for a villain. You could be a good person and still want out. This created a massive spike in divorce rates throughout the late 70s and 80s, stabilizing into a culture where the threat of divorce is a constant background radiation in every modern household. We also have to look at the choice overload phenomenon driven by the digital age. In a traditional village or a small American town in 1950, your mating pool consisted of perhaps 20 eligible people. If your marriage was difficult, you compared your spouse to the very limited alternatives available in your immediate social circle. Today, the average American carries a high-definition catalog of thousands of potential upgrades in their pocket. The divorce now mentality is heavily fed by the paradox of choice. When we are presented with an infinite array of options, our satisfaction with our current choice diminishes. We begin to wonder if we settled. We begin to look at our partner's flaws not as human traits to be managed, but as opportunity costs that are preventing us from meeting a more optimized match found on a scrolling interface. Furthermore, the economic independence of women has acted as the single greatest catalyst for this anthropological shift. In 1960, the potential outcomes for a divorced woman were often economically catastrophic. Today, with women earning more degrees than men and participating in the workforce at record levels, the economic necessity of marriage has dissolved. From an anthropological perspective, marriage has transitioned from a cornerstone institution, something you build your life on top of, to a capstone institution, something you do only after you have achieved personal and financial stability. Because it is now a capstone, it is viewed as a luxury good. And like all luxury goods, if it stops providing a high level of utility or pleasure, the modern consumer feels justified in returning it. Let's look at a case study of the gray divorce trend. We are seeing a massive surge in divorce among couples over the age of 50 who have been married for 30 years or more. Why? Because the divorce now mentality has caught up with the baby boomer generation. As life expectancy increases, a 60-year-old looks at the next 30 years of their life and asks, "Is this person the best companion for my final third?" In the past, you stayed together for the children. But once the nest is empty, and the social stigma is gone, the self-actualization drive kicks in. This generation is prioritizing the quality of their remaining years over the longevity of their past commitment. But this isn't just about unhappiness. It's about a fundamental change in how we perceive time and investment. In a consumerist society, we are trained to believe that anything broken should be replaced rather than repaired. This planned obsolescence has leaked into our intimate lives. We apply the same logic to our spouses that we apply to our smartphones. If the battery is draining and the software is glitchy, we don't spend months in a repair shop. We trade it in for the newer model with better features. This series is going to deconstruct these layers. We are going to look at the biological reality of new relationship energy and how our brains are literally addicted to the honeymoon phase, making the work of long-term marriage feel like a withdrawal symptom. We will examine the data on how social media algorithms actively reward singlehood content, creating a cultural feedback loop that makes divorce look like a glamorous glow-up rather than a traumatic life event. The problem this solves for you today is clarity. By understanding the invisible forces, the economic shifts, the legal precedents, and the psychological traps that are pushing you toward a divorce now mindset, you can finally reclaim your agency. Are you making a choice based on your true values, or are you simply a byproduct of a century of anthropological engineering? Over the next 9 parts, we are going to dive into the hypersexualization of the single market, the impact of the therapy speak culture on conflict resolution, and the terrifying reality of the loneliness epidemic that often follows the very divorce people thought would set them free. This is the masterclass on the American heart. Welcome to Part 1. To truly understand why the United States is currently gripped by a divorce now mentality, we have to look at the massive tectonic shift in how we value time and labor. In the previous section, we touched on the move from cornerstone to capstone marriage, but now we need to look at the engine under the hood, the hyper-individualistic economic structure of 2026. Imagine a citizen named Alex. Alex lives in a major U.S. metropolitan area. Alex has been married for 6 years. In a previous era, if Alex's marriage hit a rough patch, the surrounding community, the church, and the extended family would provide a scaffolding of support and pressure to keep the unit together. But in 2026, Alex is bombarded by a digital economy that views the individual as the primary unit of consumption. Corporations do not market to families anymore. They market to individuals. Your Netflix profile, your Spotify Wrapped, and your Amazon recommendations are all tuned to a single person. This creates a psychological environment where the presence of another person's needs, compromises, and friction feels like a bug in the system rather than a feature of life. The anthropology of the American household has shifted from a collaborative firm to 2 independent contractors sharing a workspace. We see this in the data regarding the rise of separate bank accounts among married couples under 40. In 1970, the joint account was the standard. It was a sign of total merger. By 2026, historical trends show that nearly 60% of millennial and Gen Z couples maintain significant financial silos. While this offers protection and autonomy, it also lowers the barrier to exit. When your finances are already decoupled, the logistical nightmare of divorce, which used to be a major deterrent, is halved. We are witnessing the streamlining of the exit process through fintech and automated legal services that make the filing process as easy as canceling a subscription service. Let us look at a case study of the hedonic treadmill applied to modern intimacy. Anthropologists often point to the 7-year itch, but in the 2020s that has accelerated into the 3-year transition. There is a neurobiological component here. When you first meet a partner, your brain is flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine. This is the limbic high. In an older, more stable society, the transition from that high into the bonding phase of oxytocin and vasopressin is seen as a successful evolution of love. However, in our current culture of high-frequency stimulation, Many Americans interpret the natural decline of the dopamine spike as the death of the relationship. They mistake the end of the honeymoon phase for a lack of compatibility. Because our culture values the peak experience above all else, the moment the relationship enters the maintenance phase, the divorce now mentality kicks in. The individual feels they are missing out on the potential outcomes of a new, more exciting connection that might be just one swipe away. The impact of therapy culture cannot be overstated here. In 2026, the language of the American household is the language of clinical psychology. Words like boundaries, narcissism, and emotional labor are used in kitchens across the country. While mental health awareness is a positive development, the misapplication of these terms has created a scenario where any form of interpersonal struggle is pathologized. If a spouse is messy, they are not just messy, they are violating a boundary. If a spouse is tired and withdrawn, they are gaslighting or exhibiting avoidant attachment. This clinical framing makes the spouse the enemy or a patient to be cured, rather than a partner to be understood. When the partner cannot be cured, the logical step in the therapy speak framework is to go no contact or to choose oneself. This is a radical departure from the historical trend of endurance and shared suffering that defined American marriages for 2 centuries. Now, consider the role of the 24-hour digital mirror. In 2026, social media is not just a place to share photos. It is an identity-shaping machine. If Alex is unhappy on a Tuesday night, Alex can open a social media app and see hundreds of influencers preaching the gospel of the glow up. The narrative is almost always the same. I left my stifling marriage, I lost weight, I started a business, and now I am living my best life. You never see the posts about the quiet Tuesday nights spent in a lonely apartment or the logistical nightmare of co-parenting through an app. The algorithm promotes the high-stakes drama of the exit and the subsequent transformation because that content generates the most engagement. This creates a distorted reality where divorce is framed as the ultimate act of self-care. Anthropology tells us that humans are mimetic creatures. We want what we see others wanting. When the digital tribe signals that leaving is the path to status and beauty, the individual feels a subconscious pressure to follow suit. The disappearance of the third place in American life has also accelerated the divorce now mentality. A third place is a social environment outside of home and work, the bowling alley, the lodge, the church hall. When these spaces existed, spouses had outlets for their frustrations and different sources of emotional fulfillment. Your spouse did not have to be your everything because you had a community of peers. In 2026, the third place has largely moved online or disappeared entirely. This has forced the modern American marriage to bear a weight it was never designed to carry. We expect our spouses to be our best friends, our sexual icons, our co-parents, our financial advisors, and our spiritual guides. When one person inevitably fails to fulfill all these roles simultaneously, the disappointment is profound. The divorce now mentality is often a reaction to the crushing weight of these unrealistic expectations. We would rather have no one than someone who only meets 80% of our infinite needs. There is also a significant shift in how we view the concept of legacy. Historically, marriage was a bridge between the past and the future. You were continuing a family line. In 2026, the American focus is almost entirely on the present moment. The decline in birth rates across the U.S. correlates directly with the rise in the divorce now mentality. When children are not the central focus of the union, the internal pressure to stay together for the sake of the future is diminished. The marriage becomes about the 2 adults and their immediate happiness. If that happiness dips below a certain threshold, there is no larger narrative to keep the couple anchored. We have moved from a cyclical view of time, where we repeat the patterns of our ancestors, to a linear view of time, where we are constantly searching for the next upgrade. But what happens when the legal system catches up to this mentality? We are seeing the rise of the pre-planned exit, where couples discuss the terms of their divorce before they even say their vows. This is not just about prenuptial agreements, it is a psychological stance. It is a recognition that the state of being married is temporary. In previous generations, the word divorce was a whispered scandal. In 2026, it is a discussed contingency. This transparency sounds healthy on the surface, but anthropologically, it changes the nature of the commitment. If you are always looking for the exit sign, you are never fully in the room. This brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all, the commodification of the human heart. In a market-driven society, everything is a transaction. We look at our partners and subconsciously calculate their net value to our lives. If the cost of the arguments, the compromises, and the boredom exceeds the perceived benefit of the companionship, we look to trade. But what does this do to the human soul over the long term? What happens to a society where no one is willing to stay when the lights go out? We are entering an era of the liquid relationship, where everything is fluid and nothing is solid. As we move forward, we have to ask, is this newfound freedom actually making us happier? Or are we just trading the cage of a bad marriage for the vacuum of total isolation? In the next part, we are going to look at the dark side of the independent life. We will explore how the technology that made it easier to leave is now making it impossible to truly connect. We will look at the rise of the algorithmic mate and how AI is starting to replace the need for human partnership altogether, creating a world where the divorce now mentality might eventually lead to the no marriage ever reality. You do not want to miss the data on how artificial intimacy is reshaping the American family tree. The transition from the divorce now mentality to the no marriage ever reality begins with a subtle algorithmic erosion of human necessity. In 2026, we are seeing a massive shift in how the American public interacts with the very concept of a partner. Historically, a spouse was the person you turned to for emotional regulation, intellectual stimulation, and physical presence. But imagine a citizen named Sarah. Sarah is 34, living in Austin, Texas. After a difficult divorce 3 years ago, Sarah found the prospect of re-entering the dating market exhausting. The potential outcomes of traditional dating, the ghosting, the mismatched expectations, the emotional risk, felt too high. Instead, Sarah began interacting with an advanced generative AI companion. Unlike a human spouse, the AI is programmed to provide infinite validation. It never gets tired, it never forgets an anniversary, and it never starts an argument about the dishes. Anthropologically, this represents a hijacking of the human attachment system. We are evolved to seek connection, but our brains are not yet sophisticated enough to distinguish between the deep, messy empathy of a human and the high-fidelity simulation of empathy provided by a machine. As these AI companions become more integrated into the American lifestyle, the threshold for what we are willing to tolerate in a human partner skyrockets. Why deal with a husband who has a bad day at work and becomes distant when you can have a digital entity that is perfectly calibrated to your emotional needs 24 hours a day? This is the rise of artificial intimacy, and it is acting as a powerful accelerant for the divorce now mentality. If the exit from a marriage leads not to loneliness, but to a customized, low-stakes digital relationship, the social and emotional cost of leaving drops to near zero. Historical trends indicate that whenever a technology makes a basic human need easier to satisfy individually, the communal or relational structure around that need collapses. We saw it with the rise of the industrial food complex, which moved the focus from the communal family dinner to the individual, microwavable meal. Now we are seeing it with emotional labor. We are outsourcing the hardest parts of being human to software. This has created a new demographic in the United States. Voluntarily solo. These are individuals who have looked at the data on modern marriage, seen the high rates of dissolution, and decided that the investment is simply not worth the risk when digital alternatives provide a similar hit of dopamine without the legal or emotional liability. Let us look at the step-by-step mechanization of this isolation. Step 1 is the normalization of digital-first communication. By 2026, the majority of initial romantic interactions in the US happen through a screen. This desensitizes us to the physical presence of the other. Step 2 is the algorithmic filtering of preferences, where we are trained to believe that a perfect match exists if we just tweak the settings. Step 3 is the inevitable disappointment when a real human fails to meet the perfection of the digital profile. This cycle reinforces the divorce now mentality because it frames the partner as a faulty product in a marketplace of infinite, perfect prototypes. Consider the case study of the urban professional in 2026. Data from major metropolitan hubs shows a significant decline in the purchase of multi-bedroom homes by married couples and a surge in luxury studio apartments designed for single living. The architecture of our cities is physically adapting to the death of the nuclear family. These living spaces are built for the individual contractor we discussed in the previous part. They are designed for a person who eats out, works remotely, and does not require the shared spaces that once facilitated the bonding of a household. When your physical environment is optimized for being alone, the presence of another person starts to feel like an intrusion. It becomes harder to share a bathroom, harder to compromise on the thermostat, and harder to synchronize schedules. The environment itself whispers that you would be more efficient, more productive, and more relaxed if you were just by yourself. This brings us to the concept of the relationship as a consumption set. In the mid-20th century, marriage was seen as a productive unit. You produced children, you produced a home, you produced a legacy. In 2026, The anthropology of the US has shifted toward a consumption-based model. We consume the experience of the partner. And because we are a society that prizes novelty and efficiency, once the consumption experience becomes stale, we feel a cultural mandate to move on. This is where the divorce now mentality turns into a form of consumer protection. People feel they are being cheated out of their best years if they stay in a relationship that is merely okay. The pressure to live an Instagram-worthy life means that an average, stable, but occasionally boring marriage is viewed as a failure. Furthermore, we must address the financialization of the American heart. In a high-inflation, high-competition economy, the cost of maintaining a family is staggering. Case studies of middle-class families in 2026 show that the stress of dual-income survival often leaves zero margin for relationship maintenance. When both partners are exhausted by the grind of the gig economy or the demands of high-pressure corporate roles, the marriage becomes another task on a to-do list. In this environment, divorce is often marketed, subtly or overtly, as a way to simplify one's life. The narrative suggests that by shedding the weight of a spouse's expectations and financial needs, you can finally achieve the career success or the personal peace you've been chasing. It is a seductive lie that ignores the massive economic hit of splitting assets and maintaining two households. But the divorce now mentality is driven more by the hope of relief than the reality of the math. We are also seeing a change in the biological narrative. For the first time in human history, a significant portion of the population is questioning the evolutionary necessity of long-term pair bonding. With the advent of advanced reproductive technologies and the shift in social norms, the link between marriage and procreation has been severed. In 2026, you do not need a spouse to have a child, and you certainly do not need a spouse to have a family. This has led to the rise of platonic co-parenting and multi-generational solo households. When the biological anchor of the pair bond is lifted, the marriage floats away on the currents of individual whim. But there is a hidden cost to this radical autonomy that the algorithms don't mention. As the divorce now mentality becomes the default, the collective social fabric of the United States is fraying. We are losing the skills of negotiation, forgiveness, and long-term grit. We are becoming a nation of experts at leaving but novices at staying. This has profound implications for our mental health, our political stability, and our ability to face large-scale national challenges. If we cannot manage the micropolitics of a two-person household, how can we manage the macropolitics of a diverse nation? As we wrap up this section, we have to look toward the next terrifying frontier. If the 2020s were the decade of the divorce now mentality, the late 2020s are becoming the era of the post-human connection. In the next part, we will dive deep into the biological data of the loneliness epidemic. We will look at how the brain actually withers in the absence of long-term, stable physical companionship. We will explore the shocking statistics of the health outcomes for the voluntarily solo and ask the question, is our pursuit of total freedom actually a slow-motion suicide of the species? We are going to look at the rise of the friendship contract as a replacement for marriage and whether or not a society can actually survive without the glue of the romantic bond. The data on the decline of human touch in the age of divorce is something you cannot afford to ignore. The biological data regarding the loneliness epidemic in 2026 presents a stark contrast to the cultural narrative of liberated singlehood. While the divorce now mentality promises an escape from emotional friction, the human brain remains fundamentally wired for long-term social regulation. Anthropologically, humans are obligately gregarious. We do not just prefer company, we require it for the regulation of our nervous systems. When a citizen like Mark, a 45-year-old software architect in Seattle, finalized his divorce, he initially felt a surge of autonomy. He could control his environment perfectly. However, 6 months into his solo life, his physiological data tells a different story. Without the presence of a long-term partner to act as a co-regulator, Mark's cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, have remained chronically elevated. This is not a subjective feeling of sadness. It is a measurable biological shift. Historical trends in psychoneuroimmunology show that long-term partners serve as biological pacemakers for one another. They synchronize sleep cycles, heart rates, and even immune responses. When that bond is severed, the brain enters a state of hypervigilance, a carryover from our ancestral past where being alone on the savannah meant certain death. In 2026, the brain does not know that Mark is safe in a high-rise apartment with a smart security system. It only knows that the primary attachment figure is gone, and it responds by staying in a state of low-grade fight or flight. This leads to chronic inflammation, which data suggests is a significant factor in the accelerated aging process seen in the long-term divorced population compared to those in stable, even if imperfect, marriages. The decline of human touch or skin hunger is the silent engine of the modern American health crisis. In a marriage, incidental touch, a hand on a shoulder, sitting next to each other on a couch, triggers the release of oxytocin, which suppresses the amygdala's fear response. Without this, the divorced individual often seeks substitutes in high-stimulation digital environments, which only serve to further deplete their dopamine reserves. We are seeing a case study of a nation that is overstimulated but undertouched. The potential outcomes of this trend include a massive spike in sleep disorders and a decrease in executive function. When the brain is constantly monitoring for social threats because it feels isolated, it has less cognitive energy for complex problem-solving or creative work. Mark finds himself less productive at his architecture firm, not because he is grieving, but because his brain is literally operating in a depleted biological state. Furthermore, we must examine the rise of the friendship contract as a desperate cultural pivot. In 2026, many Americans who have adopted the divorce now mentality are attempting to replace the marital bond with intentional community or platonic partnerships. You see this in the co-living spaces of San Francisco, or the Golden Girls-style arrangements in retirement communities in Florida. These individuals are attempting to hack the evolutionary need for companionship without the perceived baggage of romantic or sexual exclusivity. They draft legal documents outlining shared expenses, chores, and even emotional support expectations. While this solves the logistical problem of isolation, it often fails to provide the same level of biological regulation as a pair bond. The commitment in a friendship contract is fundamentally different. It lacks the perceived permanence that allows the nervous system to fully drop its guard. Let us look at the step-by-step erosion of social capital. Step 1 is the decision to prioritize individual happiness over the collective unit. Step 2 is the physical relocation, usually into a smaller, more isolated living space. Step 3 is the realization that the social network once shared as a couple has fractured. In the United States, social circles are often built on a foundation of couplehood. When the divorce happens, friends often feel forced to choose sides, or they simply drift away because the divorced individual no longer fits into the double-date economy. This creates a secondary trauma, the loss of the village. The divorce now mentality assumes the village will remain, but the historical trend shows that once the central pillar of the marriage is pulled, the entire social roof often collapses. Imagine if we could see the heat map of American loneliness in 2026. The brightest spots would not be in the rural areas, but in the most densely populated cities where the divorce rate is highest. This is the paradox of modern anthropology. We are more connected to the world via fiber optic cables than ever before, yet we are experiencing a famine of meaningful, repetitive, mundane human interaction. The repetitive nature of marriage, the boring Tuesday nights, the shared meals, the silence, is exactly what provides the stability the human brain craves. The divorce now mentality mistakes this boredom for a lack of compatibility, not realizing that boredom is often the sign of a nervous system that finally feels safe enough to rest. The health outcomes for the voluntarily solo are increasingly becoming a topic of concern for public health officials. Data indicates that social isolation is as damaging to long-term health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This is because the lack of a partner leads to a phenomenon called social snaking, where the individual constantly scans their environment for social cues they are missing, leading to social anxiety and a further retreat into digital isolation. We are seeing a generation of Americans who are technically free but biologically imprisoned by their own stress responses. The potential outcomes for the healthcare system in 2026 are staggering, as the aging divorced population enters a stage of life where they have no built-in caregiver, leading to a reliance on institutionalized care that the economy is not prepared to support. Now, consider the impact of the legacy vacuum. When the divorce now mentality leads to the termination of a family unit, it also severs the sense of continuity between generations. In 2026, more Americans report feeling like they are living in a permanent present, with no connection to the past and no stake in the future. This lack of generational anchoring leads to a decrease in long-term thinking. Why care about climate change or the national debt if you have no lineage to inherit the world you leave behind? Divorce now mentality is, at its core, an ideology of the now. It prioritizes the current emotional state over the long-term structural health of both the individual and the society. As we move into the next phase of this masterclass, we have to look at the ideological machinery that keeps this cycle spinning. We will investigate the role of the self-help industry and how it has monetized the dissolution of the American family. We will dive into the economics of the divorce industry, a multi-billion-dollar machine that thrives on conflict and the promise of a fresh start. We are going to look at the dark marketing tactics used to convince people that their spouse is the only thing standing between them and their dream life. In the next part, we will expose the financial incentives that make staying together the most countercultural act you can perform in 2026. You will see how the very structure of the U.S. economy is now betting against your marriage, and how to spot the psychological triggers designed to make you walk away. This is where the anthropology of the individual meets the cold reality of the boardroom. The economic machinery of 2026 thrives on the atomization of the American family. To understand the divorce now mentality, we must look at the cold, hard incentives of the boardroom. A married couple is an inefficient consumer unit. They share a single mortgage, a single Netflix account, one set of kitchen appliances, and often one primary vehicle. From the perspective of GDP growth, two single individuals are significantly more valuable than one married couple. When a household splits, the economy sees an immediate doubling of demand for housing, utilities, furniture, and subscription services. This is the hidden financial tailwind behind the cultural push for independence. Corporations do not need to conspire to destroy marriage. They simply need to optimize for the most profitable social structure, which is the isolated individual. Imagine a citizen named David in Columbus, Ohio. David is 42 and feeling the weight of a 15-year marriage. As he scrolls through his feed, the algorithms trained on billions of data points recognize his demographic profile and current psychological state. He begins to see targeted advertisements for solo travel, luxury bachelor apartments, and self-actualization seminars. These are not just ads. They are psychological triggers designed to present the potential outcomes of a life without his spouse as infinitely more vibrant than his current reality. The self-help industry, a multi-billion-dollar sector in 2026, plays a pivotal role here. It has pivoted from teaching people how to compromise to teaching them how to leave. The prevailing narrative in these seminars is that any form of friction is toxic, and that your partner is the primary obstacle to your highest self. This creates what anthropologists call a conflict economy. There is an entire infrastructure in the United States, legal, digital, and psychological, that profits from the dissolution of the bond. Legal tech platforms in 2026 have streamlined the divorce process to the point of frictionlessness. You can now file for dissolution via a mobile app for a flat fee, removing the traditional barrier of expensive, intimidating attorney consultations. While this democratizes access to legal relief, it also removes the cooling-off period that once allowed couples to navigate temporary crises. When the exit is as easy as an in-app purchase, the threshold for staying during a difficult season vanishes. Historical trends show that the commercialization of the individual has led to a phenomenon known as lifestyle envy. David sees his single friends posting about their spontaneous trips and their lack of domestic responsibility. He doesn't see the data on their long-term financial instability or the psychological toll of their isolation. He only sees the curated highlights. The U.S. economy in 2026 is built on the sale of the next version of yourself. Whether it is a new phone, a new career, or a new spouse, the message is constant: the current version is obsolete. This planned obsolescence has been successfully applied to the American heart. We are taught to view our relationships as beta tests. If the software has bugs, we don't patch it, we wait for the next release. Let us look at the step-by-step financialization of the divorce process. Step 1 is the normalization of the exit through media and advertising. Step 2 is the provision of low-cost, high-speed legal tools that bypass traditional mediation. Step 3 is the immediate marketing of recovery products, new housing, dating app premium tiers, and therapy for one. The transition from a shared economy to two separate economies is a massive wealth transfer from the family unit to the corporate sector. Every time a couple in America divorces, the financial services industry gains through the liquidation of shared assets and the creation of new, separate credit profiles. In 2026, the data indicates that divorced individuals are more likely to utilize high-interest consumer credit to furnish their new lives, creating a cycle of debt that tethers them even more tightly to the labor market. Now, consider the role of the Human Resources Department in this anthropological shift. In the high-pressure corporate environment of 2026, an employee with no domestic ties is often viewed as a more flexible and dedicated asset. The lack of a spouse and children means fewer requests for time off, a greater willingness to relocate, and more hours spent in the digital workspace. While companies publicly champion family values, their internal metrics often reward the hyper-available individual. This creates a subtle but pervasive workplace culture, where the demands of a marriage are seen as a professional liability. David feels this pressure subconsciously. He knows that his single colleagues are perceived as being more hungry for the next promotion because they have nothing to go home to. The impact of the influencer economy cannot be ignored in this deep dive. In 2026, the most successful content creators often build their brands on the narrative of the life transition. A divorce is a content goldmine. It provides months of high-stakes drama, followed by the predictable arc of the comeback. Viewers in the US consume this as a form of aspirational entertainment. They watch a creator move into a minimalist apartment and start over, and they begin to project that same fantasy onto their own lives. This is a case study in mimetic desire. We don't necessarily want to leave our spouses. We want the feeling of the clean slate that we see reflected on our screens. The divorce now mentality is, in many ways, a byproduct of a society that has run out of new frontiers to explore, so we have turned the destruction of our personal lives into the new adventure. But there is a darker side to this economic incentive. The rise of the algorithmic mate, which we discussed previously, is now being integrated into these financial systems. Companies are experimenting with AI-driven lifestyle assistants that don't just manage your calendar, but also offer relationship advice. These systems are optimized for the user's immediate satisfaction, which often means validating their frustrations rather than encouraging the difficult work of reconciliation. If the AI knows you spend more money when you are single, its advice will subtly lean toward the potential outcomes of independence. We are entering an era where our very tools of communication are biased against the long-term stability of the marriage bond. Furthermore, we must address the housing crisis of 2026 and its role in the divorce now mentality. While it is true that two people living together is more efficient, the predatory nature of the real estate market has created a sense of hopelessness. Many younger American couples feel that even with two incomes, they will never achieve the traditional markers of success. This despair often manifests as interpersonal tension. When the dream of the home and the stable future is priced out of reach, the marriage loses its primary structural goal. Without a shared project to work toward, the couple turns inward, scrutinizing each other's flaws until the relationship collapses under the weight of its own stagnation. As we conclude this part of the masterclass, we have to look at the psychological fallout of being a pawn in this economic game. We have seen how the boardroom bets against your marriage, but what happens when you realize that the freedom you were sold is just a different kind of trap? In the next part, we are going to explore the phenomenon of post-divorce regret, the data the influencers never show you. We will look at the rise of the remarriage trend and the surprising statistics of people who try to get back together with their ex-spouses after realizing the grass wasn't greener. We will dive into the neurochemistry of regret and the biological longing for the very person we were told was holding us back. You will see the hidden costs of the clean slate and the terrifying reality of the second chance market in 2026. This is the part of the story that the Exit app developers don't want you to read. The clean slate is perhaps the most powerful myth in the modern American lexicon. It suggests that identity is a piece of software that can be uninstalled and rebooted at will. But in 2026, the data regarding post-divorce regret reveals a different anthropological reality. We are seeing a significant rise in what sociologists call the buyer's remorse of the heart. Imagine a citizen named Jennifer. Jennifer is 48, living in suburban Chicago. 2 years ago, she followed the divorce now trajectory, convinced that her marriage was a cage preventing her from reaching her true potential. She navigated the legal apps, liquidated the joint savings, and moved into a high-end condo designed for the modern single. But 24 months later, Jennifer is experiencing a phenomenon known as the delayed grief spike. This isn't the immediate sadness of a breakup. It is a profound realization that the freedom she gained is actually a form of social irrelevance. Historical trends in the US show that divorce often leads to a 60% reduction in one's immediate social support network within the first 3 years. Jennifer finds that her weekends are quiet, her phone notifications are purely transactional, and the friends she thought would be her new tribe are busy with their own lives. The potential outcomes of her independence have shifted from high-adventure travel to a monotonous cycle of self-maintenance. This is the hidden cost of the clean slate. When you wipe the slate clean, you also wipe away the context that made your life feel meaningful. The neurochemistry of regret in 2026 is a burgeoning field of study. When an individual like Jennifer leaves a long-term marriage, They are essentially severing a decade-long biological synchronization. The brain's neural pathways are literally paved with the presence of the spouse. Every morning routine, every inside joke, and every shared frustration created a physical map in her brain. When she enters her new, perfectly curated life, those neural pathways are still firing, looking for the input that is no longer there. This creates a state of chronic cognitive dissonance. The brain perceives the absence as a missing limb, leading to a biological longing that Jennifer misinterprets as a sign that she made a mistake. Let us look at the case study of the second chance market. In 2026, we are seeing a surprising surge in reconciled couples, people who divorced, spent 18 months in the single market, and then decided to remarry their ex-spouse. Why is this happening? Because the reality of the dating market in 2026 is a brutal exercise in commodification. Jennifer enters a digital landscape where she is judged by a 3-second swipe. She realizes that the human flaws of her ex-husband, which once felt intolerable, are actually quite mild compared to the unpredictable and often performative nature of new partners. The second chance market thrives on the realization that a known set of problems is often better than an unknown set of disasters. Step by step, the cycle of regret usually follows a predictable pattern. Step 1 is the relief phase, characterized by a surge of dopamine and the novelty of a new environment. Step 2 is the stabilization phase, where the logistics of living alone become routine and the novelty wears off. Step 3 is the comparison phase, where the individual begins to weigh the benefits of their new life against the security of their old one. Step 4 is the realization of the investment gap. Jennifer realizes that building a 30-year history with someone is a task she cannot physically or emotionally repeat. She has the time to meet someone new, but she does not have the time to build a life with someone new. The anthropology of the American divorce now mentality has largely ignored the concept of sunk costs as a positive virtue. In economics, a sunk cost is something you should ignore when making future decisions. But in human relationships, sunk costs are the foundation of intimacy. The years Jennifer spent navigating her husband's career changes, his health scares, and their shared parenting are not just lost time. They are the currency of deep trust. When she liquidated the marriage, she essentially declared that currency worthless. In the second chance market of 2026, people are desperately trying to buy back that currency. We see this in the data of couples therapy, where there has been a 40% increase in divorced individuals attending sessions with their former partners to discuss the possibility of starting over. Furthermore, we must address the financial reality of the second chance market. Splitting assets in the U.S. is a massive destroyer of generational wealth. In 2026, many divorced individuals realize that they can no longer afford the retirement they planned. They are living in smaller spaces, working longer hours, and facing a solo financial future that feels precarious. The potential outcomes of their divorce were marketed as freedom, but for many, it resulted in a different kind of imprisonment: economic vulnerability. This financial pressure is a significant driver of the remarry your ex trend. It turns out that the economic efficiency of a two-person household is a very attractive feature when you are staring down the barrel of inflation and a volatile housing market. But what about the psychological triggers of the clean slate? In 2026, the media landscape is still obsessed with the narrative of the fresh start. However, we are seeing the emergence of a counterculture. This group is advocating for the radical repair. They argue that the divorce now mentality is a form of emotional consumerism that leaves everyone poorer. They point to the historical trends of successful long-term marriages, noting that the happiest couples are not those who never had problems, but those who refuse to view their partners as disposable. They are using the same digital tools, podcasts, social media, and apps to promote the idea that sticking it out is the ultimate act of rebellion in a society that wants you to quit. Imagine if Jennifer had been exposed to this counterculture before she filed for divorce. Imagine if she had been told that the boredom she felt was a natural physiological state, and that the exit ramp she was looking at led to a desert, not an oasis. The tragedy of the divorce now mentality in 2026 is that it offers a permanent solution to temporary emotional states. The clean slate is attractive because it requires no work, whereas repair requires the most difficult labor a human can perform. The ego death required to say I was wrong or let's try again. As we look at the data on post-divorce regret, we have to ask, who really benefits from the clean slate? It isn't Jennifer, and it isn't her children. The beneficiaries are the platforms that host the dating apps, the lawyers who facilitate the split, and the corporations that sell the two of everything. We are living in an era where our emotions are being harvested to fuel an economy of isolation. In the next part of this deep dive masterclass, we are going to look at the impact of this mentality on the next generation. We will examine the anthropology of the children of 2026, the first generation to grow up in a world where the divorce now mentality is the default setting for their parents. We will look at the shocking data on their attachment styles and how they are approaching their own relationships with a sense of cynical pragmatism. We will explore the rise of the anti-marriage movement among Gen Alpha and what it means for the future of the American family tree. You are going to see how the choices made today are literally rewiring the brains of the children who will lead the country in 20 years. The cycle of isolation is about to get much deeper. The anthropology of the American child in 2026 is being rewritten by what researchers call the fluid household. We must look at the psychological landscape of the next generation, specifically Gen Alpha, who are coming of age in a society where the divorce now mentality is not a scandal, but a standard operating procedure. To understand this, imagine a child named Leo. Leo is 10 years old, living in a split custody arrangement in Denver. Leo does not have a single home base. He has 2 pods. Every 4 days, Leo undergoes a total environmental shift. Different rules, different peripheral social circles, and different digital monitoring standards. While proponents of modern divorce emphasize the resilience of children, the longitudinal data emerging in 2026 suggests that this constant state of transition is creating a specific cognitive profile: the hypervigilant pragmatist. Leo's brain is adapting to a world where primary bonds are viewed as conditional. From an anthropological perspective, the family unit is supposed to be the one place where a child does not have to perform for their security. However, in the divorce now era, children often feel a subconscious pressure to act as emotional mediators or to maintain a certain version of themselves to keep the peace between 2 households. This results in an attachment style that is increasingly avoidant. If the most important people in Leo's life, his parents, could not maintain a permanent bond, Leo's developing brain concludes that permanence is a myth. By the time he reaches adulthood, Leo will likely view relationships not as sacred covenants, but as temporary leases. Historical trends in the United States show that children from divorced households are statistically more likely to divorce themselves. But in 2026, we are seeing a new variation of this trend. We are seeing a total opt-out. Gen Alpha is observing the exhaustion, the legal battles, and the financial depletion of their parents and is concluding that the entire institution of marriage is a high-risk, low-reward venture. Case studies from middle schools and high schools across the U.S. show a marked decrease in the desire for traditional romance. Instead, these children are prioritizing what they call the squad or the network. They are diversifying their emotional investments across dozens of low-intensity digital friendships, rather than betting on one high-intensity partner. This is a survival mechanism designed to insulate them from the kind of systemic collapse they witnessed in their own living rooms. Let us examine the step-by-step formation of the cynical romantic. Step 1 is the exposure to the transition phase, where the child watches the parental unit dismantle. Step 2 is the introduction of the revolving door of partners. In 2026, the speed of digital dating means that children are often introduced to a parent's new romantic interest within months of a split. Step 3 is the realization that these new figures are often as temporary as the last. For a child, this creates a world where adults are seen as transient entities. The potential outcomes of this are a generation that struggles with deep empathy, as they have been trained to protect their hearts by keeping everyone at an arm's length. The impact on the American education system is also profound. Teachers in 2026 report that the logistical complexity of the split household child is a major barrier to learning. When Leo forgets his tablet at his father's house but he is staying at his mother's, his school day is compromised. When the communication between parents is filtered through a legal app, the child becomes a data point rather than a person. This fragmentation of the domestic sphere leads to a fragmentation of the internal self. Anthropologically, the child's identity used to be rooted in the family name and the shared history of the household. Today, that identity is divided. Leo is one person at dad's and another at mom's, leading to a fragmented sense of self that follows him into his teenage years. Furthermore, we must address the role of the digital surrogate. In households where a single parent is struggling to balance the gig economy and personal recovery, the screen becomes the primary caregiver. In 2026, the average child of a divorced household spends 40% more time on unsupervised digital platforms than children in 2-parent households. These platforms are where they learn about love, sex, and commitment. And what are the algorithms showing them? They are showing them the same divorce now content we discussed earlier. They are being fed a diet of individualistic propaganda that reinforces the idea that self-interest is the only reliable compass. The cycle is self-perpetuating. The technology that facilitated the parents' divorce is now raising the child to ensure they never marry in the first place. Consider the case study of the social media-driven gender rift. Data from 2026 shows that young boys and girls in the US are diverging sharply in their views on domestic life. Many young girls, influenced by the glow-up narratives of divorced influencers, see independence as a primary virtue. Many young boys, watching the financial and social displacement of their fathers, are becoming increasingly resentful and withdrawn. This creates a massive gap in expectations before these children even reach their first date. The anthropology of the 2020s is creating a generation of young men and women who speak different emotional languages and view each other with suspicion rather than attraction. What does this mean for the future of the United States? If the family is the laboratory of citizenship, a nation of fragmented families becomes a nation of fragmented citizens. The skills learned in a stable household, compromise, shared sacrifice, and the management of long-term conflict are the same skills required for a functioning democracy. When the divorce now mentality becomes the cultural default, we lose the training ground for social cohesion. We are raising a generation of individuals who are highly skilled at advocating for their own needs, but have almost no experience in subordinating those needs for the good of a permanent collective. Imagine if we could look 20 years into the future at Leo's life. If historical trends continue, Leo will be part of the most isolated adult demographic in human history. He will likely live in a highly optimized solo apartment, his social needs met by high-fidelity AI, and his professional life conducted entirely in a virtual space. He will have successfully avoided the pain of his parents' divorce by avoiding the vulnerability of connection altogether. But he will also lack the biological and psychological benefits of the pair bond that his ancestors relied on for thousands of years. The data on the decline of the American family tree is not just about fewer marriages. It is about the thinning of the human experience. We are trading the deep, often difficult roots of a permanent family for the shallow, easy convenience of the individual life. In the next part of this series, we are going to dive into the global perspective. Is the United States an outlier? Or is the divorce now mentality a virus that is spreading across the developed world? We will look at how other cultures are fighting back against the atomization of their societies, and the surprising historical precedents for cultures that successfully reversed a declining marriage rate. We will explore the potential outcomes of the traditionalist resurgence, and whether or not a society can actually legislate its way back to stability. The war for the American heart is going global, and you need to see the front lines. As we look beyond the borders of the United States in 2026, it becomes clear that the divorce now mentality is not merely an American quirk but a byproduct of high-stage late capitalism that is currently being exported to every corner of the globe. However, the American response to this trend remains unique in its aggressive individualism. To understand where we are going, we have to look at the front lines of the global demographic struggle. Imagine a citizen named Hiroshi in Tokyo or a citizen named Elena in Milan. Both are navigating societies with birth rates far below the replacement level and marriage rates that have plummeted over the last decade. In these cultures, the divorce now mentality has evolved into something even more radical, the no-entry mentality. Anthropologically, the US serves as the laboratory for this social experiment. Historical trends show that American cultural exports, fast food, social media, or relationship structures, eventually permeate global norms. But in 2026, we are seeing the first significant pushback. In several Eastern European and East Asian nations, governments are attempting to legislate their way back to domestic stability. They are observing the potential outcomes of the American model: high social isolation, fragmented generational wealth, and a declining workforce, and they are terrified. They are implementing tax incentives for married couples, state-funded matchmaking services, and even cooling-off laws that mandate a one-year mediation period before a divorce can be finalized. But can you legislate the heart? The data from these traditionalist resurgences suggests that while you can make divorce more difficult, you cannot force people to want to stay together if the underlying anthropological incentives have shifted. In 2026, the global economy still rewards the mobile, unattached individual. A company in Berlin or Singapore cares little for Elena's marriage. It cares for her productivity. This creates a global tug-of-war between the state, which needs stable families to produce future taxpayers, and the market, which needs unencumbered workers to maximize current output. The American public is currently caught in the middle of this crossfire, with the market clearly winning. Let us look at a case study of the ideological migration. We are seeing a rise in the traditionalist movement within the U.S., often referred to as the new domesticity. This is a cohort of young Americans who are looking at the wreckage of their parents' divorces and moving in the exact opposite direction. They are adopting a lifestyle that looks like the 1950s, but is powered by 2026 technology. They use apps to track fertility, they homeschool their children using AI tutors, and they view their marriage as an act of political resistance. For this group, staying married is a way to opt out of the consumerist cycle that profits from separation. They are building micro-societies where the divorce now mentality is met with social ostracization. Step by step, this traditionalist resurgence follows a specific path. Step 1 is the rejection of the digital dating market in favor of community-vetted introductions. Step 2 is the early commitment phase, where couples marry in their early 20s to maximize their shared building years. Step 3 is the creation of ironclad social contracts that make leaving socially and economically devastating within their specific subculture. This is a radical attempt to recreate the social straitjacket of the past, proving that humans will often trade a significant amount of freedom for a sense of belonging and permanence. However, the anthropology of the U.S. is inherently resistant to this kind of collective pressure. Our national mythos is built on the pioneer who leaves the village to find a new life. This is why the divorce now mentality is so potent here. It feels like an extension of the American dream. To stay in an unhappy marriage feels like staying in a dying town. To leave feels like moving west. In 2026, the digital frontier is the new west. When a person leaves their marriage, they aren't just leaving a person. They are embarking on a journey of self-reinvention that is deeply embedded in the American DNA. Consider the potential outcomes of this cultural divergence. We are likely to see a United States that is bifurcated into two distinct social classes: the marital elite and the solo class. Historical trends in 2026 indicate that marriage is becoming a luxury good. High-earning, highly educated individuals are increasingly likely to marry and stay married, pooling their resources and creating a formidable wealth gap between themselves and the rest of the population. Meanwhile, the lower and middle classes are more susceptible to the divorce now mentality, leading to a cycle of poverty and instability that is difficult to break. The search for meaning has undergone a radical transformation in the American landscape, moving from the vertical to the horizontal. Historically, marriage was a social and economic arrangement supported by a higher religious or communal purpose. But as we navigate 2026, the anthropology of the U.S. reveals that we have effectively replaced the altar with the partner. This is the era of the secular soulmate, a concept that places a crushing, unsustainable burden on the marital bond. When traditional religious structures declined, they left behind a vacuum of transcendence. We still crave the feeling of being known, being saved, and being part of something eternal. In the absence of a deity, we have turned to our spouses to provide those spiritual goods. We expect them to be our primary source of identity, our moral compass, and our ultimate validator. Imagine a citizen named Robert in Charlotte, North Carolina. Robert does not belong to a religious organization, nor does he have a strong connection to his extended ancestry. His entire sense of self-worth is anchored in his relationship with his wife, Emily. In Robert's mind, Emily is not just a person with her own flaws and limitations. She is the curator of his happiness. This is a case study in what sociologists call the all-or-nothing marriage. Because Robert has no other source of spiritual or existential grounding, any friction in the marriage is not just a disagreement. It is a crisis of meaning. If Emily is unhappy, Robert's entire universe destabilizes. This hyperinflation of the partner's importance is a primary driver of the divorce now mentality. When you make your spouse a god, the inevitable discovery that they are merely human feels like a betrayal of the highest order. The potential outcomes of this spiritual shift are visible in the data on marital satisfaction. In 2026, Americans report higher expectations for emotional intimacy than any generation in human history. We want our partners to be our best friends, our sexual icons, our intellectual peers, and our spiritual guides. Anthropologically, this is a mathematical impossibility. No single human being can fulfill the diverse needs that were once distributed across an entire village or a religious community. When the partner inevitably fails to be everything, the modern American concludes that they must be the wrong person. The divorce now mentality is the logical conclusion of a society that has confused a relationship with a religion. We leave not because the person is bad, but because they failed to be our savior. Historical trends in the U.S. show that as religious affiliation dropped, the divorce rate among the non-affiliated remained significantly higher than among those with a shared communal practice. This is not necessarily about the theology but about the scaffolding. A religious community provides a narrative that transcends the individual's current feelings. It offers rituals for forgiveness and a social circle that views the marriage as a collective asset rather than a private hobby. Without this, couples like Robert and Emily are isolated in their own emotional echo chambers. When the honeymoon phase ends, as the neurobiology of 2026 proves it must, they have no external reason to stay. They are left with only their feelings,